Let's just kick off straight away. Our first speaker this morning is Mr. Tim Kobe, who is the founder and CEO of 8 Inc., a globally recognized strategic and experienced design firm. 8 Inc. counts amongst its clients such luminaries as Apple, Virgin Atlantic Airways, Nike, Coke, Knoll and Citibank. Mr. Kobe.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to say I look forward to meeting lots of graduates from the Future MAD program. I can't wait to see that. It's great to be here. It's really a pleasure, and thank you for coming out early this morning and engaging in this. I think it's a very important dialogue to be having. So thanks to Singapore Polytechnic for hosting this discussion. I think the word disruption was mentioned a number of times here. We know that we live in this era where it's profound level of change. Many people who are comfortable in the old way of doing things maybe find this terrifying. The rest of us in the creative community, entrepreneurs, etc., we should be incredibly excited that we live in this time. So we see it as a great opportunity to do new things and to do better things. We talk a lot about designing human experience. This is our studio has been around. Next year will be 30 years, working in many parts of the world, best known for work with Apple Computer, but our work is really focusing on human outcomes. And I think as we talk about artificial intelligence today, we talk about many other areas where design, thinking, and user experience is important. We have to recognize that it always comes back to the human outcome. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we talking about artificial intelligence today? Are we talking about the impact it's really having on our humanity? And many companies mistake the technology for value creation. And I want to draw a distinction between those as we talk about it. But many companies are focused on what the technology can enable rather than the outcomes that it provides. And it's important to make sure that we keep in mind that we're doing all of this so that it has some type of application that can be meaningful for all of us. Endrening is at Stanford University, but he talks about artificial intelligence as the next electricity. And I think it's important to make that distinction because when you think about it as electricity, you think about what applications can be enabled by it. And that means that there are many diverse opportunities for artificial intelligence, but it's also something that can be an underlying thread that has enormous opportunities in many different areas. So with any technology, it's the application that is the fundamental question. It's what we do with that capability. And again, those outcomes are ultimately creating the most value, whether that's economic value, human value, personal satisfaction, if it addresses the elements that relate back to who we are as people. There's also this piece that we keep seeing. It's a constant kind of polar debate between artificial intelligence disrupting our jobs and the fear of that. I see that as a distraction. I don't think we should spend a lot of time worrying about that. I think what we should be probably most fearful of is that there may be people out there who are looking to use the technology more for personal benefit at the expense of society. And that's the part we should probably be really thinking about. So it has to do with how open and how accessible artificial intelligence can become in a way that it enables the most benefit for the most people. Like any technology, the value will come out of what we do with it, but I think this is a technology still looking for an application. We see it being used in pretty minor ways, whether you're applying for housing loans or whether you're maybe getting approvals for certain types of loans and things. But the idea is that we're probably still at such an infancy with the technology in terms of artificial intelligence that the real problem is originality. We should be using our creative capabilities to drive original thinking and original applications that haven't been thought of. And one of the challenges with the technology is much of the data that's been created and much of the code that's being written for artificial intelligence is looking at things that have preceded us. And half of everything is the future. We shouldn't forget about the future and the opportunities that come with creating new things. And so again, the creative community becomes enormously valuable in society because you are all the people who are creating the next interesting thing. And that's something that isn't necessarily always built on precedent. I think when we look at this idea of understanding how artificial intelligence can create value starts to question what value you place on things. And it's important to make sure that you understand that many companies are often confused with what this can represent. And again, when we look at what is essential for human progress, often we see creativity at the root of that. It's one of the most valuable capabilities that human beings possess. It's one of the things that tends to separate us from artificial intelligence. And so recognizing that the value of human creativity is not only our ability to think, but it's our ability to feel. And it's our ability to infer and sense things that are very difficult to bring out in a pure sort of algorithm state. And so what we look at is this idea of return on experience. We talk about this a fair amount, but if you're looking at creating value, ultimately it comes down to what we, as people, how we interact both socially or individually in a way that's creating meaning and creating value. And this idea for artificial intelligence as a tool to enable better experience is something that I think is at the heart of our discussions today. But we're really at this point where a new form of electricity has been created. Now we get to all go out and start to work on how to create value for that. So one of the key things, and I have a handful of points here to share with you, is how to think of the value of return on experience. What are the things that people encounter that starts to create some value for them? And it has to do with really, as I said, what does it do for people? And one of the things that we are often concerned about is this idea of incremental improvement. And incremental improvement happens fairly often, but what do you remember about change in society? What are the important things that have affected us historically? And you look back and it has to be the things that have impacted your lives in the most significant way. And I guess, we don't see that, whether it's iPhone 21 or Samsung 26 or Huawei 33, this kind of incremental improvement is fundamentally having an impact. It's extending an idea, but we're really looking for new opportunities to make change. And what people remember and what they care about is how it's affected their lives. Who doesn't know what this is? Anybody? Yeah. So what's interesting about this is
and this is what
the way it was presented.
Boom. That's iPod. I happen to have one right here in my pocket, in fact. There it is, right there. So, this amazing little device holds 1,000 songs, and it goes right in my pocket.
So what do you remember about that? Who remembers how much memory the first iPod had? Nobody, right? What do you remember? You remember 1,000 songs in your pocket. You remember what the technology enabled. And so when we go back to starting to think about any type of technology, any type of creative product that comes from the work we're doing, it's important to recognize that it's what it does for people at the heart of the technology sets up the value of that technology. Another piece we look at in terms of return on experience is this idea that the information comes from uncommon insights. If you ask people in 1989 what we needed, they wouldn't have said a decentralized network of information nodes that are linked using hypertext. That's probably not what would have jumped to first people's mind. But it's the foundation of the way we live today. It's the foundation of our commerce systems, our governmental systems, many other systems. And companies that have recognized that and been able to take advantage of that tend to have large-scale disruptive impact on those who don't. And so it's important to recognize the value of the uncommon insight when we start to think about these. A competitor to Amazon is a company called GoPlus. Amazon's been around 20 plus years. It's working off of a model which this company believes is equivalent to Netscape 1.0. So what is the next generation? It's time for additional changes. And this idea that Amazon has an aggregated solution in a place where it tends to disrupt and impact local communities, this is a company that's looking to activate local communities on an aggregated platform. So it's focusing on access, relevance, and trust, and it's using a number of different touch points, in this case a station element for last mile delivery of elements, but is working hard to incorporate here in Singapore with the federated locker program and other systems as a way of seeing this next generation of activating our exchange of commerce. Another point that we think about with return on experience is it has to be courageous. Don't forget that if everybody tells you it's wrong, it's not necessarily wrong. The idea that differentiation can be important is really fundamental. We see this in business all the time. Companies will spend an enormous amount of effort creating a differentiated product, and then they'll turn around and deliver it to the marketplace in the very same way as their competitors. So what happens? It commoditizes their value, it commoditizes their product, and consumers don't see a difference. So it's very important to turn up the differentiation volume in the conversation when it comes to using this in a commercial venture. I use the Apple example. One of the reasons when we designed the first Apple stores, the night before we opened, Steve was sitting on one of the tables and he said, guys, what if no one comes tomorrow? And at that point we were terrified to hear that comment, but the idea that he wasn't really sure it was going to work really pointed to the point that he was taking a risk. He was putting his reputation and the company's business online. He was hearing from so-called experts that the program was going to be an enormous failure and that they shouldn't be investing a few $1 million in this retail program to change their company. The good news is Bloomberg 10 years later wrote a much better article. This was when we were selling $36,000 a square foot out of the program. But the important piece here was what would have happened if Apple had listened to the pundits, decided not to do the retail program. The real risk was actually listening to those voices. This store did $500 million in sales last year out of one unit. Ultimately, what this was about was understanding the human connection between companies and the services they provide, as well as the passion and loyalty that can generate, and the idea that the stores were part of building an Apple community. And then, is it worth the bet? I think it was worth the risk. We started at a $2.5 billion company and recently broke over $1 trillion. But for there to be return on experience, it also has to be relevant and connected. And when you think about relevance and connectivity, it's really hard. It's hard to chase that relevance conversation. But one of the pieces of research that we always look at is this notion that many people can't articulate the types of things that they need in the future. And so it's important when you're doing exploration, particularly in the creative field, to make sure that you're stretching beyond what you know. If you do a survey of what people know, the chances of getting something that people already know is pretty high. So we have to take the responsibility for the other half of things, which is essentially the future. And it's very hard to do that today. It's very complex. So there's something that NYU has been working with called New Algorithm of Value. But if you look at the most successful companies today, they tend to be the ones in the upper right-hand corner. Hopefully you can see that, yeah. And it's a combination of the number of receptors that a company has. This is the touch points that they have with their customers and the amount of intelligence that they can derive from their customers. Every time you do a Google search, Google gets smarter. That as a competitive advantage in terms of refining their product, refining their information, and understanding more about what they can do for you is an incredibly valuable thing. You see that Netflix has recently moved into this community. And ironically, this group represents 50% of the NASDAQ stock value. So it's not that it doesn't have importance, both economically for jobs as well as for successful business. Xiaomi, we took an extension of this idea. We recently finished a project for them in Shenzhen, and taking this idea of getting more receptors and more intelligence out of the engagement. And so they asked us to create a space that represents their products. They wanted to make it white like Apple. But other than that, we looked at this notion of a digital portal, the idea of extending the space from 200 square meters, being able to sell 200 SKUs of products, to selling 2,000. And this is the first time what we call a mono-channel type of application, where the digital and the physical are being used simultaneously, as opposed to conceived of as separate channels. And there's a little video that shows how it works. So she just purchased the product and received it in a matter of minutes. And what this does is it gives Xiaomi now an idea of what things people are interested in. Each one of the products that are presented has the name of the product, the price, and a QR code. If you want to know more about it, you need to scan the QR code. That means you have to engage with your mobile device. And that's not so difficult because everyone has one. You can then go through looking at features and benefits, configurations, prices, and purchase decision or not, and then how to take it, whether to collect it in the store, have it delivered, or pick it up at a drop station. If you think of each one of those interactions, those are all receptor points for Xiaomi to gain an understanding of what's working with their product, what's not working with their product. So it becomes enormously valuable for them. They've increased their receptors. For every time a customer interacts with them, they get much more information from it. It increases their intelligence that they can derive from those interactions. It blows up the traditional real estate model of how many products you can fit into a space, because now we can fit unlimited number of products into the space. They're seeing 10x on their sales, and we've been able to really move the amount of interactions that people have with the brand to an extraordinarily new level. Another example about return on experience is the idea of adoption. One of the things is a lot of people talk about ideas. Ideas are great, but they're a starting point. How you know if you have innovation is whether people adopt it. That means you can't think of it in your silo. You have to think about how it engages people and how it works with people. Our focus on designing human experience is really addressing this column on the far right. But if you look at creating a great engagement with people, if you're able to engage with them at an emotional level, you're going to increase your transactions and your conversions. You're also building something else that's very valuable. You're building advocacy. It means people will be out selling your products, your concepts. And they're more likely to forgive a mistake when you screw something up. This is an example of a project in Ginza that we completed recently in Tokyo for Nissan. It's a large experience center. And I won't go into the details of the design and the different elements, but they had asked us to move from 3,000 visitors, which they had prior to the project, to 4,000 visitors. They felt that if we could increase the number of visitors to the space by 25%, they would consider it a success. We ended up getting 250,000 visitors a month. So it was an incredibly unestimated result from Nissan's perspective, but it shows the power of creating an experience that people can have with a brand in a way that enables much, much greater engagement, much more traction, and much more advocacy. And when we think about advocacy, we try to look at irrational loyalty, the notion that loyalty needs to be something that people feel and are a part of in a much more meaningful way. And one of the elements of word of mouth associated with that, everybody knows it's important. Most people don't know that it represents such a high degree as a result of a direct experience with a company or with a brand. This is a project, a vending project we did for JR Water in Japan as well. This is looking at selling drinks on train station platforms and using a digital interface as a way of helping to animate and encourage different types of communications as well as interactions. But one of the things that's most interesting about this was the idea of how to create irrational loyalty. We recognize that when there's earthquakes in Japan, people get stranded on the platforms, and that there's an opportunity for the company to connect with people. So we put a battery pack in these vending machines, and we convince them to have the vending machines come to life if there's ever an event that happens where people are getting stranded. And so in this case, we had 50 of these in the market when the Fukushima earthquake happened. And everything was down, the power was off, and the trains stopped running, people were stranded, but these machines woke up from the battery pack and gave away drinks. So a bubble floated up and said, if you want a drink, take one. You took one and it gave away the drinks. So as a result, the irrational loyalty built around this particular solution was extraordinary. And so then the last point I'll have is this idea that return on experience, if you focus on that, ultimately leads to better return on investment for companies. And so we created a new type of experience in China for Lincoln, moving from transactions to relationships. And one of the key things that we did within the design of the new showrooms was we recommended that they eliminate car salesmen. They thought that that was a very odd type of proposal to make, given that they were trying to sell cars, but we found that people were buying cars differently. And for Lincoln to enter the market and to be a competitor with 50 other competitors already established, we had to make them more differentiated, and we had to change the way you felt about that transaction. Car salesmen notoriously score at the bottom of the list of people that other people want to talk to anyway. So it made a lot of sense. Ultimately, we launched in November. By May, we broke the record for the most Lincoln cars sold in the history. A year later, we were the #3 luxury automobile brand in China, and now the program has gone to a global rollout. Ultimately, as I said, an idea is not innovation. Innovation is adoption. That means you take that idea, you design it, you take it through a process, and you deliver it to the market and let the market decide if it's a valuable idea or not. We tend to work with a number of extraordinary people. We've had engagements over the years that I can only describe as some of the most amazing times, at least in my life. And what is the common thread is every one of these people believe the human outcome is the thing that you focus on. And you design the business, you design the solution to deliver that. And that's what's made them all successful and iconic in their own way. Ultimately, we believe the only way that works, or where there's that stickiness, is that how it's designed. So that puts the responsibility on all of you here who are in the creative field to really look at how you design something. It's not enough just to produce the technology. You have to produce what it does for people in a way that's compelling. So ultimately, if you think of artificial intelligence, it's understanding how to create human value. And if you want to think about value creation, the best way to do that is to understand how to create better human experiences. Thank you.